Hi, I'm Bruce Fritz, and I'm here to introduce Terry Gilliam.
Oh, thanks. The music at the end is actually very beautiful. Is this thing alive? The music at the end you missed. But anyway, the end credits last for about 7 minutes, so it's a real killer. Everybody worked hard, but nah.
Well, the film is quite an achievement, and obviously, as we know from the intro, it was more than 25 years in the making. When did you first come across the story of Don Quixote? When did you sort of become obsessed with this tale?
Exactly 30 years ago. And we'd finished The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, and I called Jake Eberts, the executive producer, and said, Jake, I need $20 million. I've got two names. One is Quixote and the other is Gilliam. And he said, done. And then I got the book. And then I read the book and realized, fuck me. What am I going to do? How do we do this? Anyway, that was the beginning. That money was immediately trumped, if I can use that word, trumped by another company who offered me $25 million, and I went that direction. And after many months, it realized that it wasn't going to happen there, and that began the long and painful up and down journey for all these 3 decades.
And what was it about the story that interested you?
No idea.
Really?
I don't know. There's certain things, I don't think I was obsessed. I think I was possessed. And whatever, I mean, Quixote is an extraordinary character, and that is really the first modern book. And until one reads it, one doesn't realize how profoundly wonderful Cervantes was. And once it gets into worms, it's like one of those worms, I guess, in Africa that get in your ear and get into your brain and eats away at everything else. And once you start Quixote, you slowly have to become. It's the same thing. A picaresque adventure is on the way, and you need a bit of madness. You need a lot of reasonable people around you who drive you forward by saying, don't do it. Get out. Concentrate on something else. Because reasonable people should never be listened to, is my theory. And that's it. And we went up and down. There's been so many, I think it was 11 different producers or grapes of producers, grapes of wrath. It's like groups of producers who had their moment, and they were all kind of mini Quixotes, saying that they were the only producer who could ever make this impossible film, this cursed film. And of course they would fail again and again, but I would waste a lot of time with these people, and each time I'd gather another group of actors, and off we go, and again, crash. But finally, we wore down all the reasonable people. The marketplace was worth only about $12.5 million. Actually, euros is what we were working in, 12.5. And the budget was always around 16 million euros. And it was only after the penultimate version, which the plug was pulled as the actors were on their way to the airport for the first reading, a lady came along, my daughter, who was one of the producers, met. She had a company called Alacran, which are there at the beginning, and she wanted to see the film made. She'd seen the documentary, she knew the tale of the years spent, and she was the fairy godmother that said, bing, Terry, you're going to the ball. And that's what happened.
And she was a child when this whole process started, right? So she's lived with this her entire life.
No, you mean my daughter?
Your daughter, yes.
Yes, she's been hanging around for a long time. Yes.
So what was it like working with her, particularly on this project?
Well, she's a pain in the ass, but she's my daughter. She's probably the only person who can actually shout at me and get away with it. Yeah, it's very nice. I've raised both my daughters to be independent in their thinking and have as little respect as possible for their old man.
And how did the story change over the years? Because it started out it was going to be more of a time traveling story, right, where he was actually going to meet the real Don Quixote, and then
it was a bit like Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court. You get bumped on the head, and you end up in the 17th century with Quixote, and that's the version we had going when Johnny Depp and Jean Rochefort were in it, and after that collapsed, there was a few years. Disappeared because we were trying to get it back from the French insurance company that had to pay up a lot of money when it collapsed before. And that proved to be very difficult. And finally, Jeremy Thomas, very famous British producer, managed to get it back. And then Tony Grisoni and I started looking at it again. And the idea came up, the idea of Toby not just being, the Johnny version, he was just an executive in a advertising company, but we made him into a director, and we produced him 10 years earlier when he was still innocent, as it were. A man that still had dreams, a guy who hadn't been suckered and seduced by the success of his little film. And that was a big leap, and I think it was a really important leap because it also solved our problem of Dulcinea. We needed a Dulcinea. We could never get one that really worked. But the idea of a 15-year-old girl from a village who is told you could be a star, and she believes it, and she heads off to the big city and ends up basically a whore, which is what the original Dulcinea was. And so suddenly that all came together beautifully.
So do you see this film as autobiographical in any way, and that it became about a movie about making a movie in a way?
It wasn't meant that way, and I wasn't really thinking of that. I mean, I know, looking back at it now, it does seem much more autobiographical than it felt like at the time. I was just trying to get this thing made, whatever it took.
And the first film that you co-directed was Monty Python and the Holy Grail. I mean, does this feel full circle in a way, coming back to the Knights and
I've been running from that for a long time. This was a special night. I mean, it wasn't any old night.
Yeah, it's true. So the documentary Lost in La Mancha that was made about the last time you tried to make it and it falling apart. What was that like for you to watch that film after having lived through it? I mean, was
it was funny.
Yeah?
Yeah. I remember it was a screening we had in London. Michael Kamen, who did the music for Brazil and Munchausen, was sitting behind me, along with the actor Paul McGann, who was the eye of Withnell and I. And at the end of it, they were very quiet through the whole thing. I turned around and they were ashen-faced. What? How did you? It was all of that. And I said, it's kind of funny. It's funny because you survived. If you don't survive, it's not funny.
Right. And how did you come across this particular cast? I mean, Adam Driver, what did you see in him that he could carry this movie?
Adam, I met him in London. I'd never seen Girls. I really knew very little about him. I'd seen him as the first time he played Kylo Ren. And again, Amy, my daughter, said, you should meet this guy. And we met for lunch, and I immediately liked him. He was nothing like what I'd been thinking about, and that's the first thing that got me excited. And he's not like most actors. I know there was nothing actory about him. He doesn't look like a leading man in any ordinary sense. And the fact that he had joined the Marines after 9/11, I thought was, wow, that's incredibly naive, strangely innocent, and almost knightly. And I thought, this is a very interesting one. And I just think he's extraordinary. I think he's wonderful in this film. His range is finally, we're able to see his range, which is incredible.
Yeah. And Jonathan Pryce, obviously you've worked with before, starting with Brazil and a couple times since then. What's your working relationship like?
Well, I avoided it for many years because he kept pestering me, wanting to play the part of Quixote, but he was too young. He was too something that I didn't want at the time. It was only after the penultimate collapse when Michael Palin, who was at that point playing Quixote, said, I've had enough of this Portuguese producer and his ways of working, and he pissed off. And there's Jonathan still banging at the door. he's just like Quixote in the film with the hunting party. Hey, there's somebody else here, and this little guy is still, hey, I'm still here. And It was perfect. I mean, it really was that moment when I really felt the film is making itself, and I'm just getting in the way of it. And the film had just waited till we got the right cast.
So what was the most difficult part of filming for you once you actually got the cameras rolling? What was your biggest challenge?
I think the biggest thing was the first week or so, because I was so intimidated by people's expectations. The fact that it had been running on for so many years and people had seen the documentary, they had their own imagination working. And whatever film was in their heads, I knew was going to be better than anything I could do. And that really weighed me down until just the quotidian business of surviving another day, getting all the shit sorted out, and doing it. That finally took over, and off we went. We were incredibly lucky because we basically were on location the whole time, and we're outside the great majority of the film, and we had no weather cover, so we were very vulnerable. And for once, nature and God and whatever forces there are out there were kind to us.
Were there times over the years that you thought it wasn't going to get made, or did you always think at some point you would conquer
No,
this?
I just couldn't get it. At times I hoped it wouldn't get made, frankly. It was just this terrible thing. And I said it was like a brain tumor. Until I get this thing removed, I can't get on with what's left of my life. It wasn't fun. That's all I can say.
Yeah. And how does it feel now that it's made, now that it's out, people are seeing it?
Well, I realize without it, I have no life.
Well, I don't think that's true, but well, let's go back to the beginning of your life. So you started out as an animator, working with Monty Python. I mean, do you feel like that shaped you visually as a filmmaker, that almost anything is possible in animation? And did you bring that kind of philosophy to live action films when you started making?
I don't know if it was like that. I was always a cartoonist, and cartoonists deal in grotesques. We do not just accept reality in its banal existence. We have to stretch and pull and do all of those things. So that's one of the consistent things, I suppose, in my films. The other thing, as an animator, you understand what a single frame does, and you think in a slightly different way. You're down to lots of detail, and that you can do that in 2 frames, or if you cut a frame out there, it has an impact, and things like that. But that, I think more and more, especially in Quixote, I kind of escaped even that, because I just thought, I was trying to shoot this thing in a very different way, not with my wide-angle lenses and weird angles. I was just trying to observe some wonderful actors doing their stuff. It really felt like that, yeah.
And so many of your films are about outsiders, and you've been kind of an outsider in some ways as a filmmaker, and being the only American in Python. I mean, did that sort of lend itself to that sort of point of view of being, set apart from even that group of anarchists?
Yes, it's been a lonely life I've led. That's why I like making films. I gather these people around, and because I pay them, they become my friends.
Well, one of those people was Robin Williams, and we're in the Robin Williams Theater here, so I wanted to ask you about...
That's what he became.
Exactly.
I hadn't heard from Robin for years. I didn't know what had happened to him. This is it. I'm in the belly of Robin. Thank you.
What was he like to direct? I mean, it seemed like such a force of nature that you would just sort of try to harness that spirit, but what was it like, particularly on Fisher King, to try to direct him?
Utter joy. The way I directed him was by hiring Jeff Bridges. Because Robin and myself together, we just fly off into the stratosphere. And Jeff was the secret, because he was the anchor that grounded that film and grounded Robin and myself. He was great. I mean, the thing with Robin is that his one weakness was he felt there were a lot of fans out there that expected him to do things in a certain way. And so as we were shooting, and it was scripted, and he was wonderful, but each week there would be a moment where the pressure cooker couldn't take it anymore, and he had to start doing stuff. And that was always the trick. And you couldn't say, don't do it. You just said, all right, go for a bit, Rob. Oh, that bit worked, the other stuff didn't. Let's just go back to the script. And he got that out of his system, and it was just wonderful. Yeah.
And you shot that film here in New York. What was it like being out on the streets, shooting,
Yeah. Well, it happened today. We were in the car somewhere, I don't know, and I heard the sound of the fire engine, that horrible noise that they make. And that was what it was like when we were shooting down. We were on Lower Park Avenue shooting there, and we'd set up, a complicated tracking shot, ready to go, and suddenly you would hear that siren, and you knew it was coming for us, because there was always some asshole out there thought it was very funny to call a false fire alarm, and we'd have to tear up our tracks and pull the whole thing apart. So that was a daily joy, shooting in New York.
So what are the biggest changes you've seen in the business since you started? I mean, you started out making more independent films. George Harrison produced Time Bandits, and then you got into the studio system, and then sort of worked your way back out of it again.
I certainly have.
What's the biggest change you've seen over the years in terms of just trying to get a movie made?
Well, really, what's happened is the money is now either you make a film for less than $10 million or one for more than $100 million. There's nothing in between, and that is what is horrible. You can't. That whole range of films, which allowed a certain scale, a cinematic scale, and you could deal with things in a more interesting way, really, than just three people sitting around a table talking. And that's, I think, the thing that really bothers me, because the studios were very clever. When independent films started, they had their cadet version of independent films, which basically pushed all the other independent films out of the business. The only thing I like now is the fact that Netflix, Amazon, are producing so much material now, which is giving work to actors, writers, directors, technicians. And that's great. My problem is it's on small screens, and that's what I want to work on. And the only hope is that home cinemas are getting bigger, the screens are, aren't they? But when I see somebody watching a film, even especially if it's one of mine, on an iPhone, that's when the guns come out. And I think it's actually legitimate to kill people with that. It's disgraceful. I mean, sitting in here, we're in a dark room. We are the audience. It's like being at the campfire with the great storytellers up there. The story is big. We are small. We're respectful. iPhone, the story is tiny, but the viewer is a giant. Oh, fuck off. They're not getting the experience, and they don't get the communal experience. That's the other thing. I love sitting at home and watching all the screeners when the award season is on, but it's so much nicer to sit in a crowd of people, especially, I think, with a film like this, because somebody's always reacting to it, and it's not all agreed what you react to and how you react, and the thing bubbles, and then the important thing, I think, and I've done this with most of my films, people tend to either love them or hate them. So if you go out to dinner with friends after seeing one of my films, you know you're going to have a wonderful dinner conversation as you fight over who was right and who was wrong. You've got something to talk about.
So I know you joked about not having a life now that it's over, but what is next for you? I mean, do you know what you're going to move on to after this?
No,
there's a Time Bandits TV series I know that's
there is that, which I read on the internet that I'm the executive producer. That was nice to know. I'm still not sure what that job entails, and I haven't signed my contract, but at least I find out what's going on on the web. I don't know. I really don't have anything in mind, to be honest. I said this was going to happen, that when Quixote left, there would be a void. And I'm afraid I was right. There's nothing going on in there, and I really want to get a couple things under my belt before I kick the bucket. And yet I don't want to get caught in another 30 years of trying to get something made. So anybody who's got a film ready to go, cast and financed, I'm ready.
Have you thought about getting back into acting?
I never got into it. What are you talking about? I think I can perform, but I can't act. There's a difference. Yeah, I could make a fool of myself anytime. Don't worry. No, acting is something I've never had much of a feeling for. I liked, putting on makeup and hiding and being grotesque and ridiculous things. But acting, good acting, is something that I don't want to give that much of myself over to. Really? No. I like holding on to what's left of me. I don't want to end up as schizophrenic and fucked up as most actors end up being. No.
Except for the people here, of course.
This lot look pretty healthy, I think. Yeah, I think they're good. They're good.
Have you thought about getting back to animation, doing an animated film or an animated TV series at this point?
No, I've got no plans. See, and I don't want to go backwards. I'd like to constantly move forward into something new and exciting. So who knows?
So how would you describe your style with actors on the set? I mean, are you very hands-on with them, or you sort of let them do their...
Do I inappropriately hands-on?
Yeah, well,
Yes,
no, I
yes, yes, yes. Yeah. I think it's only right. I want to bring inappropriateness back into fashion, and it's no. I think if I've got any skill, it's choosing the right people. That's the key. Working with people that I think understand what we're doing, that are smart, that are fun to be with, that you will enjoy working with. Actually, not working, playing with, because that's what we get paid to do. We get to build a little sandbox, and during that period, we play. And I've always liked, I don't like the term acting. I like the term a player, because that's a bit more honest. And if one can create an environment where people feel safe, that they can fall on their face, they can take leaps and crash down, and it won't be exposed to the outside world, then I think it's good. I just love being surprised by actors every day, and especially with great actors like that. Every moment, because there's something comes up, that's not at all the way we thought about it when we were writing it. And one can say, all right, let's bring it back to what we wrote, but I don't like that, because I think, especially after been waiting to do something for 30 years and thinking about it, it's so good when somebody has a better idea. And I'm happy to follow that and see where we go. It's... I don't know. I think if I do anything, I'm a good audience. And I'm close. I'm probably in their face too much, frankly. But if they're funny, I laugh. And if they're tragic, I'll weep.
Well, these actors, players here have some questions for you. So let's get started. This is a question from Adam Auslander. Did Lost in La Mancha help get this film made? And if so, how so? Do you think it sort of stirred up interest in the story over the years?
I think it was a help, because it really brought to a lot of people this thing we were trying to do, and what we got in the documentary looks very good, and you can see me as a tragic player in the whole thing, and so sympathy is out there, and once people are aware of that, well, that's how it got made, because a woman who had seen that and had heard the tale of this long gestation and just wanted to see the film. She had one other request, and that was to walk up the red carpet at Cannes, which we did. And even better, I got to waltz with her on the red carpet at Cannes. That was great.
Question from Terry G. No, that's for Terry G. Sorry, a question from yourself.
Speaking of schizophrenia,
I don't know
I'm asking my own self.
With all the projects you've done over the last 25 to 30 years, how did you keep this film on your radar? How did you prioritize this with other ongoing projects?
Well, it was my default position for all those years. And of course, after again another year or 2 or 3 of failure, you want to do something else to escape. And things come up, or we wrote other things. And so in the course of that, I did Brothers Grimm, Tideland, and Zero Theorem. But at the end of each of those films, you're waiting to think what's going to happen next. And there was little Quixote waving, hi. And so back to work we would do. Yeah, you couldn't have done, I couldn't have done it without these breaks and achieving other things along the way. That's all.
Question from Edward. George Harrison was a friend and producer of yours. Had you ever spoken to him about producing this movie?
No, I think Handmade Films, which was the company that we formed between George Harrison and Monty Python after George rescued Life of Brian, because literally the money, again, was pulled out on a Thursday. We were supposed to start on a Saturday, and George came to the rescue because, again, he was a Python fan, and to make it even easier, he was an ex-Beatle. And then we set the company together, and we made Time Bandits. We made, with Nell and I came through there. Long Good Friday we didn't make, but we picked up. Private Function, White Palettes. It was great because we had a source of funding, and we had the freedom to just do things that we wanted to make. But by the time this one came around, no, George the company had gone. And I think George he'd been, I think the word is betrayed by his manager, who was also ours at that point, and he had had enough of it, yeah.
Question from Jace. How do you approach a scene when you're about to shoot it in terms of blocking rehearsal and where to put the camera?
You put it here. I mean, I loved John Huston. In his later years, the cameraman would position John Huston's chair where the cameraman felt the camera should be. So John would sit on his chair, and they say, "Where would you like the camera?" Well, right here. I mean, I storyboard a lot of stuff. I've storyboarded less along the way, and probably the first one that I didn't storyboard was Fisher King, because with Mercedes, Jeff, Robin, Amanda, you got such great actors. I would actually plan out what I'm doing, and then in the morning we'd start walking it through. And after we'd walked it through a couple times, I realized I was completely wrong, and let's do it differently. I think that was the moment that I started trusting actors more than I trusted myself, because I wasn't trying to be flash with the camera. It was about those performances, those characters, and I could always come up, okay, we could do a shot like this, but what's the point when the actors are sort of pulling you another direction? No, because I'm focusing on the wrong bit of the scene. It's very simple.
Question from Barbara Christie. Has the fiction of Gabriel Garcia Marquez influenced your work? I see so much of magical realism in your films.
Yeah, 100 Years of Solitude I love. I mean, I think it's extraordinary. I don't know if it's really, I don't know if I can give him the credit. There's just so many things that have influenced me. Everything has. I mean, Stanley Kubrick influenced me more, Kurosawa, Bergman, Buñuel, and the other one was, oh, come on, don't do it. I got a thing called nominal aphasia just kicked in. Who directed Singing in the Rain besides Gene Kelly?
Stanley Donen.
Stanley Donen. I was with Stanley Donen at one of the sunset. This is sunset speaking.
No,
it's getting darker.
No.
It's all fading away. Stanley was on, there was a group of professionals. There was Stanley, Volker Schlondorf, myself, and we were at Sundance. And I had just finished Fisher King, and there was an evening where Stanley showed his films, Funny Face, I mean, these romantic comedies with dancing and singing, and I said, God, if I'd seen this before we finished Fisher King, I would have dedicated the film to him, because those films had more impact on me than I had realized. And he said, and I said, they're so romantic, they're beautiful. And he says, it really ruined my life, is what he said, because I believe that as well. I've been through 4 marriages. And it's like
time for a couple more questions. Stephanie asks, what's the most remarkable and difficult thing about working in opera? You've gotten into opera in recent years, doing some directing.
I mean, the interesting thing is to know nothing about opera. I think that's what my approach was. I've always loved listening to opera, but then when I see productions and I see that Juliet is played by a late 50s, very large woman, I have problems with that. I think things have got to be a little bit more like the real world is. And the music is wonderful. So I was seduced into doing an opera, I don't know how many years ago it is now, and it was Berlioz's Damnation of Faust. And I listened to it, and the only reason I agreed to do it was that it had never been successful. So I thought I can't be compared to all the great versions of it. And then I insisted that I had control of the casting, because again, in opera, often the singers are booked long before the director is booked. And I just dug in my heels, and luckily the English National Opera were backing me on this. And we didn't have a Faust until about 2 weeks before we started rehearsals. It was important to get the right people, not just great singers, but they had to be actors as well. And again, we put a cast together that worked very well. Mephistopheles and Faust had known each other before. And in fact, Mephistopheles had been in a pop group called Harvey and the Wallbangers. And it's like, and Marguerite had trained as a scientist and ended up as a singer. So you're with really interesting people. And we had a great time, and it worked. The advantage was Berlioz had not really written it as an opera. He had written, I think it was 8 symphonic pieces and then stuck them all together with the Faustian tale. And I think it was an epiphany, it really was. I just listened to this stuff and had an idea. I said, let's do it in Germany in the first half of the 20th century. Interesting time. And we could go just on a visual level from German Romanticism, beautiful paintings of mountains, through the First World War, to the Weimar Republic, to the rise of anti-Semitism and Nazism. And you get to hell eventually. And it worked. And because I had no experience in opera, I was luckily put together with a lady named Leah Hausman, who was called the movement director. That's what she normally dealt with. She taught me a lot. And we made this thing, and it was a big success. And then I had to do another one because it was successful.
And the last question, what were the main challenges with the studio system while producing this film compared to other films you've done in the past? I mean, you basically had to go outside the studio system.
Yeah, I've been outside the studio system since, what was the last one I did? Was it 12 months? Fear and Loathing was the last one in Hollywood. Sadly, for all my hatred of Hollywood, the 3 films, 12 Monkeys, Fear and Loathing, and Fisher King were the most easy films I've ever done, and the most successful as well. So I'm getting something wrong with my demand for independence. Yeah, outside is even harder because you've got to pick up pieces of money from all over the place. And in this case, there was a Portuguese producer, Spanish producers, French producers, Belgian producers, and an English producer. This is a far too multi-headed beast, is all I can say. Yeah.
Well, I hope you have many more easy films ahead of you, and we look forward to seeing them. Thank you so much for coming with us today. Terry Gilliam.
Thank you.